I'm going to spare you from a PowerPoint and leave you with beautiful images behind me. It's good to be back with you. I think I missed the symposium last year, but the year prior we were here, and good to be back with you to talk once again about Arctic and the impacts of the reduced Arctic sea ice on naval and maritime operations. You don't need me to tell you, but I will repeat, more open water in the Arctic means more maritime traffic. There's no secret there. The Navy believes that between 2012 and 2025, vessel activity in the Bering Strait will more than double, from 483 to 1,000, and that the number of vessels transiting the Northern Sea route will grow tenfold, from 45 transits in 2012 to 450 by 2025. So basically more open water, more maritime activity. The billion-dollar question here, though, is whether the United States is going to have the infrastructure in place to support that level of activity, or whether we effectively cede operational control to other Arctic nations. To me, I don't think that is an alternative that is worthwhile. Make no mistake about it, an increase in Arctic activity is going to happen with or without the United States involvement. In Russian waters, Canadian waters, other nations' vessels, including non-Arctic nations, these are going to be transiting through American waters. The United States, however, does have a strategic geographic advantage that no other nation can match. On one side of the Arctic, of course, we have the Bering Strait, a choke point for trans-Arctic activity as the only maritime route between the Pacific and the Arctic. And then, of course, on the other side of the Arctic, we have three routes to the Atlantic, off of Norway, between Iceland and Greenland, and between Greenland and Canada, with main position just to the south. So it makes good sense to have facilities in place to monitor, accommodate, and benefit from this traffic, whether from a national security perspective, an economic perspective, or an environmental perspective. It's also clear, though, that with the current fiscal limitations in both the local, the state, and of course the federal budgets, we're going to need private and international financing to help develop the needed infrastructure, from ports to navigational aids and even for icebreakers, perhaps. Look at some of the companies. Shooty Shipping out of Norway, they built up port facilities in Norway on one side of the Arctic in anticipation of the growth in Arctic shipping. They're very interested in developing routes into the Pacific. Singapore, which of course knows a little bit about port operations, they're interested in utilizing their expertise for port development in the Arctic. Iceland's oldest shipping company, Einscap, moved their U.S. operations to Portland, Maine, thus connecting Maine to the Arctic and Scandinavia. The opportunity is clearly out there. It's knocking at the door. The question is whether or not we're willing to step up, brief the partners, and move ahead or kind of muddle along with the status quo. It's no surprise that I favor the former approach, but we need to knock down some barriers to allow for greater private sector participation. This past February, the Corps of Engineers released a draft feasibility report for a deep draft port at the Port of Nome. The report contemplates dredging the outer harbor to 28 feet and extending the causeway to allow for a 450-foot large vessel dock. With an estimated cost of $210 million, the federal government would pick up some $97 million, and the remainder would be borne by local and by state interests. We included an amendment in the WRDA bill, the 2014 Water Resources and Development Act, to enable the Army Corps to pursue partnerships with non-federal public entities to work on deep draft ports. But we need to expand this to allow for similar engagement with the private sector, making the possibility for ports like the Port of Nome much more plausible and feasible. In addition, we really have got to move beyond the notion that an Arctic project is somehow just an earmark for Alaska. This has been troubling. One of the difficulties that I had with that WRDA amendment back in 14 is that it initially focused on partnerships for Arctic deep draft ports. And I was told at the time we were trying to move this through the WRDA bill that when we include the word Arctic, it's basically synonymous with Alaska, and it was thus an earmark, and we're not going to allow it. So in order to get the amendment included, I had to take out the word Arctic. This is crazy. It just makes no sense, but this is what we were dealing with. I think we've made a little more progress in that manner, but we've got to get to a point where the Arctic is recognized as a national term, as a national priority, and really a national interest. That's part of the reason that Senator King and I formed this Senate Arctic Caucus. We wanted to bring along greater awareness of the importance of the Arctic to the nation as a whole, as well as to each state individually and beyond Alaska. We always say, and we say it a lot back home, we are an Arctic nation because of Alaska, and that is true. That is true, but the Arctic goes beyond just more than our state. Regardless of where you live, there is a nexus to the Arctic and a reason why our Arctic priorities should matter to the entire nation. So as you network and focus on these issues, I would certainly encourage your assistance in developing this broader mindset. Now, I mentioned icebreakers, and I would like to offer a little bit of food for thought on an idea that Meade Treadwell, our former Lieutenant Governor and Chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, mentioned in a recent article for the Harvard International Review. And in his article, Meade suggests that Arctic nations establish an icebreaker ship escort service across the Arctic, with or without Russia's involvement. The service would effectively provide regular shipping schedules and convoys across the Arctic to provide a level of reliability that's currently not available, and work to break Russia's near monopoly on Arctic shipping, and also ensure a competitive transit price for those seeking to benefit from the Arctic's shorter shipping routes. And as you look at Meade's proposal, it strikes me that there are really two very different needs for icebreakers in the Arctic. One is for the growing level of commercial maritime activity that we are not currently prepared for. And the other is for the traditional search and rescue and support functions that the U.S. Coast Guard typically provides. And given the relatively fast pace in which the former is growing, I think it is worth the discussion to see if we should focus on the non-governmental side of icebreaker activity first, to at least have some assets in place and buy us some time as we continue the very long process of icebreaker procurement by the Coast Guard. So we have to ask the question, do we encourage some sort of public-private consortium to offer commercial icebreaking services? Is that something that we should perhaps be exploring with other Arctic nations? If the federal government determines that such a service is not in its interest, should individual states, whether it's Alaska, Maine, Washington State, states that have Alaska and Arctic shipping interests, should they pursue this matter with the international Arctic community themselves? So I would offer that up to you this morning for this discussion and further thought. Final point I'd like to make today is that none of this activity, port development, commercial shipping support services, public-private partnerships, should occur without appropriate and considerable engagement by those that will be most impacted by the increase in maritime activity, and that's the local populations. Contrary to popular belief, and perhaps some of the pictures that we have out there, the Arctic is not a snow globe. It's not untouched. It's not undeveloped. Humans have inhabited the Arctic for thousands of years, and people are living, raising their families working hard up in the north to be part of that world up there. The indigenous peoples have learned to balance the harsh yet fragile environment in a sustainable manner. We need to make sure that any additional activity will continue that sustainability while opening up new opportunities at the same time. And economic development and environmental stewardship are not mutually exclusive, and the local communities are truly in the best position to carry out that relationship. Again, thank you for not only the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you this morning, but to thank you for your interest in the Arctic and the issues that face us today and going forward. We all know that with the chairmanship of the Arctic Council in front of us, we have an opportunity as a nation to truly be leading on all things Arctic. And it is at this level where these conversations and discussions begin and move out that we do make a difference in broadening the perspective on the world in the North. So thank you for your interest and all that you do. With that, I'm pleased to take quick questions if that's appropriate, but pleased to be with you.
Yes, it is.